That document defeated a billion-dollar lawsuit. It held until 2021. On the 31st of May 2026, Linus Torvalds called AI-assisted kernel contributions the new normal. The developer certificate of origin still requires a human to certify. I wrote this. When an AI writes the patch, the human who commits it signs that certification. Can 22-year-old governance infrastructure hold the AI accountability question?
Let's get into it.
In May 1994, an error message changed 35 years of work. 28 hours waiting for the kernel to compile. That frustration is now a governance architecture being called to answer the AI question. This is the Hamberger report. I am Andreas Hamberger, Enterprise Architect, Wellington. 5 lessons. That is what 35 years of Linux distills into. Not retrospective wisdom. Actual patterns, verified by repetition across every context I have worked in. ISP operations, telco infrastructure, government cloud migration, and now the AI governance that sits on top of everything Linux built. These are not Linux lessons. They are civilizational lessons, now in play as the world tries to govern AI. The kernel that started as a hobby in 1991 underpins every serious AI training environment on the planet. The question it was built to answer has not changed. Who controls the tools you depend on? Bazaar wins, not because chaos is better than order, but because distributed communities that ship code consistently outperform centralized organizations that protect code defensively. I have never found a context where this principle failed. The general public license made the structural contributions had to flow back to the commons. That legal architecture created an incentive to contribute rather than to hoard. Linux did not win the server market by being technically superior. It won by having more eyes on more bugs in more hardware configurations than any single vendor could match. The network effects of transparency compounded over decades into an infrastructure layer that now runs every hyperscale cloud, every supercomputer cluster, and every serious AI training environment on the planet. Release early, release often is not a philosophy, it is a discipline. Ship something, see what breaks, fix it publicly, repeat. Worse is better. The design that ships and works is almost always more durable than the design that perfects. I have seen this in every architecture engagement I have ever run. In January 1992, Tannenbaum told Torvalds that Linux was obsolete. Monolithic kernels were architecturally inferior. The future belonged to microkernels. Tannenbaum was correct about the theory. Torvalds shipped the kernel. Linux 1.0 launched in March 1994. The GNU-herd microkernel did not reach production until 2015. By then, Linux was running the internet. A system that exists in the hands of users accumulates real-world feedback that no theoretical design can replicate. The moment you prioritize theoretical correctness over operational feedback, you are building a cathedral no one will use. Lethal by design, running every Friday on this channel, applies this principle to autonomous weapons governance. The link is in the description. Governance is what makes collaboration at scale possible. The SCO lawsuit proved it. The communities that dismiss governance as overhead end up unable to prove the provenance of what they built. The SCO group filed suit against IBM in March 2003, claiming Linux contained stolen Unix source code. Every enterprise deploying Linux faced potential liability. SCO lost comprehensively. The community defeated it through the Developer Certificate of Origin, created in 2004, requiring every contributor to certify that their code was theirs to submit. That certification built a provenance chain SCO could not break. Novell produced a record showing the relevant Unix copyright transfers had never occurred. The case was not defeated by technical merit alone. It was defeated by a community that maintained its governance records with the same rigor it applied to its code. Governance is not bureaucracy. It is the infrastructure that makes collaboration at scale possible. Invisible infrastructure is unexamined infrastructure. Linux disappeared and became the default between 2010 and 2020. That disappearance is both the highest compliment and the deepest risk. Every serious cloud deployment, every supercomputer, Every Android device in 4 billion pockets now runs a Linux kernel. Nobody announced it. The US Space Force Unified Platform ground segment runs on open source software, including Linux-derived components. Every nation wanting sovereign control over space-based assets depends at the infrastructure layer on the governance architecture the Linux community built. China's Kylin Linux and Russia's Astra Linux exist because both states concluded that dependency on a foreign developed operating system was a sovereign risk they could not accept. They are building domestic alternatives to a stack they do not control. The Linux Foundation's Tokenomics Foundation, announced the 3rd of June 2026, extends that accountability question into the AI inference economics layer. The governance architecture that makes Linux trustworthy enough to run space assets is being called to do the same work for AI. The human element has never been automated away. Every AI agent that now assists with kernel patches runs on a foundation built by people willing to spend 28 hours waiting for a compile to finish. I met Linus Torvalds at LinuxConf Australia at the University of New South Wales. Google and Red Hat had run bar tabs. Both had run dry. Torvalds said, "Just put it on Novell's tab." That evening, Torvalds told me he had heard of Yopa. My New Zealand distribution had reached #1 on DistroWatch. The kernel's author knew it existed. On the 31st of May 2026, Torvalds released Linux 7.1 Release Candidate 6 and called AI-driven contributions the new normal. The developer certificate of origin requires every contributor to certify, "I wrote this code." When an AI assists in writing a patch, the person who runs git commit is the signatory. Whether that certification retains its legal meaning when the author is a language model is unresolved. The Linux community answered the authorship question once. It is about to answer it again. 5 patents, 35 years. One unchanged question. Who controls the tools you depend on? The Linux community answered it once with a license and a governance record. The AI question demands exactly the same discipline. The Bazaar model applies to open-weight AI development. The governance lesson applies to every organization deploying AI agents without a developer certificate of origin equivalent for what those agents produce. The invisibility lesson applies to every infrastructure architect who stopped examining the Linux layer because it stopped being interesting. The person who runs git commit on an AI-generated patch is still accountable. What has changed is how much they understand about what they just shipped. The answer to the AI question will need to be built the same way as Linux was, slowly, collectively, in public, by people willing to do the unglamorous work of maintaining the commons. The kernel is infinite, not because it runs forever, because the questions it was built to answer keep returning in new forms at new scales, demanding the same discipline. This is the Hamberger Report. I am Andreas Hamberger. Until next week.
That is the Hamberger Report for today. If this was useful, subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more professionals find the channel. You will find links to everything we covered in the description below. I am Andreas Hamberger, and I will see you tomorrow.
Like and subscribe.